Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Big news today. Michigan. Yes, Michigan, looking at you. They have moved to repeal their no rights at work legislation. It's out of the House, going to the Senate. Moving on a promise that they made to voters in Michigan in 2022 that they would repeal the horrible right-to-work law that Republicans rammed through like thieves in the night a little over a decade ago. And again, I look at when Republicans did this, like thieves in the night. It's my number one reason why I'm against term limits. Because a good number of the people who voted for this horrible legislation back in 2012 were people who were term limited out and they were looking for a job. So it was the payoff. You vote for this no rights at work. You take this ability of workers to fight for better wages, hours, conditions away, and we'll give you a soft landing spot. All you got to do is vote for this lovely sounding piece of legislation. Because who could possibly be against someone's right to work? Who could be against that? And yet we know no rights, no work, and not only that, lower wages, less benefits, and less safe. As one of the proponents of the legislation pointed out, that since Michigan went this horrible direction, wages are down 13%, and injuries at work are up 50%. Also, union membership has fallen from the fifth highest in the country down to 12th. And that was always the plan. That's the idea of these no rights at work schemes. It's to lower the number of people who have the ability to collectively bargain. Because what they like, again, it's about separating the sheep. It's about separating we the working people, because it's easier to negotiate and get your will over one or two, but not the entire facility, which is why collective bargaining works and why it has to be broken. Now, I love the right to work folks' arguments. No, we're not anti-union. No, we wouldn't do that. We're for choice. And yet you see time and time again, because they understand where the power is. The power is in the moneyed interests. The power is in if you look at Pennsylvania's workers' compensation law, it still refers to the employer-employee relationship as a master-servant relationship. So understand where their thinking is. They know where the power is. They know where the money is. It's certainly not the workers. So this is a huge, to steal a Joe Biden, this is a BFD. This is a big freaking deal. Finally, Democrats going, we're gonna do it. Virginia's still mad at you. But we'll see if it gets through the Senate, and I believe it will, and I believe the governor will sign it, and we will see one of these horrible pieces of legislation go down. And look, we need to do this across the country to give workers the ability to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, conditions. Now, the moneyed interest, they're not going to go softly. They're not going to go quietly into that good night. In fact, billionaire Betsy DeVos, you may remember her, Trump's education secretary, and some of the other moneyed interests of Michigan, they're rattling the sabers a little bit, saying that they may petition for a drive to let the voters decide now, because they're playing on voters didn't want to add collective bargaining rights to their constitution. It failed in that vote, so they're taking this going, see, they don't want it. I think now is the time, especially after the shutdown, especially after you see the massive disparity in wages between the billionaire Betsies of the world and all the people who actually go out and do the work. It's going to be an interesting moment. And the reason I bring this up today, Good news today, Bernie Sanders, chairman of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, the HELP Committee. I love the fact that Bernie's the chair of this. And one of the great quotes that came out of Sanders today was, there is a class war going on whether we want to recognize it or not. And I tend to recognize it. Yeah, I can, you go back to the quote attributed to Jay Gould, I could easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. And that was what kind of played out in this hearing today. As you had a couple of, you had the right to work guy there from on one side. You had I think a chamber guy, if I'm not mistaken. And then you had Mary Kay Henry from SEIU, Liz Schuler from the AFL-CIO, and Sean O'Brien from the Teamsters, which O'Brien got all of the headlines today because much of the attention was focused on him and the exchange between him and Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin. And look, I want to get into that, but the most important quote that came out of it is O'Brien said, when an employer, be they rail carriers, package companies, or coffee shops, gets away with repeated abuse of American workers, the legislators who let it happen are complicit in these crimes. And I've been saying this for the longest time. Look, these companies have been getting away, literally, with committing crimes daily. And honestly, and I said this the other day, if I'm advising a company on how to break their union, it would be malpractice to not have them break the law. It would be malpractice to say, no, don't not fire someone. That's wrong. It's bad. No, the law is so weak, the teeth are so grinded down to nubs that it doesn't matter. The penalties are non-existent. And this is what O'Brien and the others were saying. Look, we need major comprehensive labor law reform. We need real teeth in organizing. Now, what I loved, oh boy, every Republican who stepped up there was, we're not against unions. No, it's the same. Understand what the right line is. The Republican, the conservative, the right-leaning, the anti-worker line is always the same. Whether it's a guy in Michigan, whether it's their no rights at work guy, whether it's Mix, the national no rights at work guy, no matter, or a senator on the help committee, it's all the same. We're not anti-union. No, we just believe in competition, and we want people to have choice. And yet you see that the choice that they get is to be harassed, intimidated, browbeaten, sometimes fired. And again, we've seen these high-profile cases, which are not new. This stuff's been going on for decades, but we're finally paying attention to it. And this hearing is a pretty big deal in that finally someone in our government is bringing it up. Is it going to go anywhere? I doubt it. But it's important to keep bringing this stuff up and important to keep talking about it in a way that workers see someone fighting for them. Look, the thing I loved most of all about this hearing was the fact that O'Brien was not going to back down from Markwayne Mullin. Mullin was talking, when they come after me, I encourage, physical this or that. I'm going to take him on because he thinks he's Billy, bad, what. And O'Brien didn't back down, and good on him. It's about time working people have a little swagger. It's about time that working people man up and say, you know what, we're not going to back down. We're not going to take it on the chin anymore. We're going to stand up and fight. And I love the fact that O'Brien, while he didn't have any facts in front of him, he wasn't wrong. He pointed out that CEOs are getting away with, millions of dollars, and they're hiding money. And he pointed it back at Markwayne Mullin, who is a really rich guy, and said, well, how much do you make? Because Mullin tried to go after him for what he makes as the union president. Now, we can argue whether $195,000 a year for a union president is too much. I don't think so. But we can argue whether that's too much in this day and age, especially when you look at, you got some UPS drivers who are making $100,500. Now, Mullin said, well, you've got these feeder drivers who are making $35,000, which is not even close to possible. if that's the case, you only worked a couple of months. But wanted to throw this out there to make it look like, well, you got these rich union bosses making $195,000 a year without looking in the mirror. Because here's a guy, according to Tulsa World, which is a news publication out in Oklahoma where Mark Wayne Mullen's from. They pointed out, looking at the financial disclosures that he put forth as a candidate, that his wealth in 2020 ranged from $7.3 million to $29.9 million at the end of 2020. For the last election in 2022, his wealth ranged in the 31.6 to 75.6 million range. Significantly more than the prior 2 years. Now, you go, well, that's because, everyone got a little bit wealthier. If you're in, in the Senate, you obviously, stuff. And why I bring this up is O'Brien said, well, how much do you make? And he said that he made $50,000 a year. And I'm going, how do you build that kind of wealth on $50,000 a year? Now, he says he puts it back into his business because he wants us to believe that he lives like a pauper. I want to know. I now have to see the $50,000 in tax forms. I now have to see the claims that Mark Wayne Mullen made that his employees make more than union plumbers with better wages, better benefits, better conditions. I now have to see this because, look, if it's true, good on Mark Wayne Mullen. I haven't seen that often. There have been a few exceptions where that has rung true, but the general rule is union workers make better wages, hours, conditions. That's the general rule. Now, again, you look at some of this stuff. They talked about, why does it always have to be so adversarial? And I've always said it doesn't have to be. Workers don't want it to be adversarial. They want to participate in the company that they work for. They want to put all of their energy, they want to put all of their passion into making that company successful. But it's got to come back to them. I say all the time, the company that I work for, I want them to be as profitable as possible. So that come negotiation time, we see better wages in our pockets too. I want that company to be successful for 100 years so that I can retire and my kids, if they want to work there, can work there, and their kids, and so on. But this right-wing frame that unions want to put companies out of business, again, front and center in the adversarial discussions. And it doesn't have to be this way. There can be a symbiotic relationship where companies are going, yeah, we want the best labor, we want the best product we can get, and the workers are like, yeah, we want to work for a company that treats us well. That should be something that can be somewhat agreed on, but at the end of it, when you start talking about, CEOs and executives and shareholders wanting more and more and more, and this insatiable appetite for more, who gets squeezed? Well, the workers, because they're nothing but a negative on the balance sheet today. And it wasn't always that way. So the question is, how do you get back to a place where it's no longer that adversarial? And I say the more people in unions, the more people across the board who have access to union jobs, the better it's going to be. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got lots to get to today. Lots on my mind. Back after this. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll grab ours. Back after this.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So lots of email around Schmucker Carlson. Reality, the headlines, it's the end of Tucker Carlson. You had the headline, Fox is effed, by former senior Obama advisor Dan Pfeiffer. And look, this has been the kind of from the left and from the middle, this has been kind of look how bad it is for Fox News. Look at these emails and look at all of this information that's coming out about how they view their viewers as dupes and morons, and how they knew the big lie was a big lie. But as Rupert Murdoch said, they didn't care. It was about the money. It's not about red or blue, right or wrong, black or white, up or down. It's about cash. It's about green. It's about putting it in their pocket. And one of the interesting back and forths that popped up, the exchange between Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, and Tucker Carlson, where Ingraham goes, my anger is at the news channel. It's pronounced. Carlson says, it should be. We devote our lives to building an audience. And they let Chris Wallace and Leland effing Fittert wreck it too much. Hannity says, too much is correct. I'm disgusted at this point. Ingraham, I think the three of us have enormous power. We have more power than we know or exercise together. And they together decided that they were going to, continue to lie. Continue to push the big lie, while Vittert and Wallace were saying, no, this isn't it. Now, Vittert and Wallace are all gone. They left and went somewhere else because they're actually journalists. I mean, I don't always agree with them, but they're actually journalists telling the story. And what's come up in the emails that I'm getting from people, and this is the weird thing is, everything's now, did you see Tucker Carlson's video? Did you see the video? They were walking between the ropes. And you knew this was going to happen because Republicans think strategically long-term. They think message long-term. They understand their base better than we understand anything else. And I was saying at the time when the January 6th committee was coming together and figuring out how they were going to go forward, and Kevin McCarthy said, we're not participating. If you're not going to give us our attack dogs, and this was an excuse more than anything, because they didn't want anyone on that committee. They said, if you don't give us who we want, we can't put our criminals on there, then we're gonna back out. That was a strategic move. Everyone said, oh, it's stupid. They should have done that. No, they knew what they were doing. They didn't want to have to defend January 6th. They didn't want to have to defend Donald Trump. They didn't want to have to defend the base who showed up and defecated on the floor. They didn't want to have to defend the guy urinating on the desk. They didn't want to have to defend the people stabbing policemen with flagpoles. They didn't want to have to do that. They wanted to be able to sanitize that and say, oh, that's just those liberals and those Democrats showing you this stuff. So they got the video. And Tucker Carlson boiled 40,000 hours of video down to a couple minutes, and they found people walking between the velvet ropes. They found people taking pictures. They found people, skipping through the halls. They found people smelling butterflies. They found all kinds of wonderful images out of 40,000 hours of video. And now they're presenting their narrative, as will Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans. Because this isn't about getting to the truth. This isn't about hashing out an argument and really getting down to reality. This is about narrative. This is about storytelling. This is about the green. Because now we see, Kevin McCarthy, we're going to have our probe into January 6th, and we'll show you. The difference is Democrats aren't going to be stupid enough to go, no, we're not going to participate. They're going to go in there and fight every day for what Republicans bring up. And this Tucker Carlson video is part of that. The stuff that he's been saying and the narrative that, no, these were good people. It was a picnic day. Understand, January 6th, these folks, they went to Washington, D.C. for one purpose. One purpose was to stop the certification of the presidential election. That was it. They went there with that sole intent. Said it over and over and over again. The crime was we're stopping it. And yeah, were there people doing, park kind of things? Sure. But there were also criminals breaking stuff and doing things that landed them in jail, as it should. But what's interesting to me is the Republican base. And this is the part that I'm interested in, because the base is they're kind of like baby birds. They want their information chewed up and basically dropped into their mouths bit by bit so that they don't have to think about it. Because understand, Fox is a con, and those people are the mark. All the hate, no reward for working people. But what you are doing is you are making the rich richer. And I got this idea today. I was thinking about an old movie. The movie was called A Face in the Crowd. Andy Griffith was the star. He played a character, Lonesome Rhodes, who, good old yokel local, just a good old down to earth, good old boy from Arkansas. And, a woman puts him on the radio and he gets, it's kind of a hit. People take to him and his star rises to eventually he gets on TV and he's got a huge TV audience, and, all the working people are gathered around the TV, at the bars and at home and at work and all these places to listen to this guy's message because they think he's one of them. And the end, because at the beginning he is. At the beginning, he's like they are. But as he gets wealthier and more powerful, he turns on them, like the Fox News has done. And I went and I looked at the final scene, because at the end of this, you see the rise of Andy Griffith's character until the end, where the woman is, has lost faith in him. She believes in the mission. She believes in the ideology and what he's saying. He doesn't. So at the end, she leaves the microphone potted up so that people can hear what he really thinks. And as the credits are about to roll and they're smiling and waving, and he goes, look at all those morons out there. I could easily take chicken fertilizer and sell it to them as caviar. I could make them eat dog food and they'd think it's steak. Sure, I got them. I got them like this. You know what the public's like, a cage full of guinea pigs. He said, "Good night, you stupid idiots," with a big smile on his face. "Good night, you miserable slobs," smiling like grin ear to ear. There are a lot of trained seals out there, he said. I toss them a dead fish and they flip their flippers. And then they turn to the crowds. And the crowds are like, "Oh, he's a monster. He's horrible." And he turned to the workers. "Oh, he's terrible." And they turn away from him and he's gone. He's done. He's over. We are not that society. We are not that group of people, because what's coming out should be his Lonesome Rhodes moment. Should be the moment when every person in this country looks at Tucker Carlson and the rest of them and says, "You're the monster. You're the liar. You gotta go." I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2007. That was the day 7,000 workers at Northrop Grumman, a shipyard company in Pascagoula, Mississippi, went out on strike. Grumman is one of the largest defense contractors in the world. The workers were members of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 733, and the Pascagoula Metal Trades Council. They were still reeling from the ravages of Hurricane Katrina just 2 years earlier. The hurricane had devastated the Mississippi Gulf Coast and sent prices for housing skyrocketing. But while workers suffered, Katrina brought $3 billion in federal contracts to Northrop Grumman to repair hurricane damage. Despite this, Grumman proposed a 4-year contract for the workers with no raises and increased healthcare costs. For many workers, this did not sit well. They knew the company had received massive government contracts, but still was not willing to treat workers fairly at the bargaining table. The union members rejected the offer and voted to strike. The company came back with a proposal offering small raises, which did not keep pace with the cost of living. The strike was called. For 4 weeks, workers marched and manned the picket lines. During the strike, the company cut off the workers' health care coverage. The company then offered slightly higher wages and reduced the increases to health care coverage. Although the proposal was not enough to keep up with the soaring local cost of living, union members voted to end the strike and accept the offer. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Many of today's right-wing governors and state legislators have a problem. By constantly pushing an extremist ideological agenda of nonsense about nutty conspiracy theories while imposing autocratic laws to ban everything from voting to library books, they've become widely ridiculed as some combo of kooky, clownish, and embarrassingly incompetent. That's why it's significant that Missouri's GOP lawmakers have not only recognized their image problem, but have actually made an effort to demonstrate that they are serious-minded public officials concerned about their professionalism. Namely, the State House of Representatives has adopted a dress code. Seriously. Specifically, the attire mandate addresses the pressing state issue of female lawmakers who come to work dressed normally but without jackets. Disapproving legislative leaders clucked that this fashion faux pas was undermining the public's respect for them. But now, says GOP Representative Ann Kelly, sponsor of the new code, quote, "It has been fixed." Henceforth, all women legislators in the Show Me state must wear blazers or cardigans in order to, as Kelly explained, always maintain a formal and professional atmosphere in the House. Professional? Excuse me, but these far-right state legislatures totter between being goofy policy forums and carnival sideshows. The only proper attire for many of these so-called legislative leaders would be straitjackets. One lawmaker even claimed that the code was about protecting freedom. The clothing mandate, she explained, eliminates the possibility that the state will be the clothing police. This is Jim Hightower saying, "I'm thinking of moving to Missouri. It must be wonderful to live in a state where the government has already fixed all the big problems people really care about, letting the legislative body focus on properly clothing its women members."
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the war on the 20th century commences as the governor of Arkansas has signed into law. You know, who needs to verify how old that kid is working in that meat processing plant? You know, we don't really need to know how old they are. You know, we need to get those kids back to work. They're too lazy, you know, playing video games when they should be back in the mines. You know, sweeping the bathrooms at school. Get rid of those union janitors. Remember when Newt Gingrich said that? The goal has always been, and again, this is the Inflation Reduction Act for Republicans. We're going to put kids to work so parents can afford to live. Wow, brilliant. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the attacks on children, both from the work standpoint and education front. I've asked Jessica Akers to come talk with us. Jessica is the president of the Arkansas AFL-CIO. Jessica, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Rick.
So Sarah Sanders has decided, you know what? We need cheap labor. We need easy, accessible labor. Let's get those kids back in the workforce.
You know, unfortunately, that's what it's looking like. You know, it's the typical kind of national Republican message of red tape, getting rid of red tape and deregulating everything, making it easier to exploit workers for sure.
Now, what has she done here? I mean, I look at Iowa. Iowa's got a horrible bill. And again, you look across this country, there are a bunch of laws going after child labor laws, which I got to tell you, I never thought would happen. As a parent, I can't imagine going, yeah, we should have kids working on the kill floor of the meat processing plant. Well, absolutely. And we should give them, give the employers liability shields as long as they can have the cover of the schools. I can't fathom that parents are thrilled with this. So nuts and bolts. What has Sarah Huckabee Sanders signed? What's this going to mean for kids in Arkansas?
So what she signed it today, I do believe. What it did was it removed this work permit that we had in place in Arkansas. As I was doing some research before talking to you, some states have work permits via schools, right? But it was through the DOL, a work permit for kids under 16 to work, but it required a parent to sign. It required age verification, and it required the work hour to be disclosed. And the argument was that it was, burdensome on the parents, or burdensome on the state. I don't really exactly know who they were saying it was burdensome on.
It was just burdensome. We know it was burdensome. We don't know who it was burdensome on, but we know.
Right. So we're going to take it away. And, the message behind that was, putting the choice back into parents' hands, similar to the school choice arguments we see. And, really just opening a door that could very much be a slippery slope. I saw that bill in Iowa. We have Tyson here in Arkansas. We have lots of meat packing plants, and we're actually in a couple of our plants had some of those miners from the janitorial service, I guess, from up in Wisconsin, just the week this bill ran in the House.
Yeah. No, there's no, and of course they didn't care. But this is the thing that I've been saying is these child labor law changes aren't going to affect my kids. Because clearly my kids are I'm gonna advocate for them. I'm gonna fight for them, and they don't have to work. I don't need my children to go out into the workforce so we can keep a roof over our family's head. And I'm fortunate in that way, and a lot of us are. The majority of us are. I know this kind of legislation is going to harm the least of us. Me, when I was a kid, when I was 8 or 9 years old, growing up in a housing project, those are the kids that are going to be harmed by this, and that's the point. The point of the cruelty seems to be the point in Republican policy, and this is it. We're going to continue to kick the downtrodden, the poor, and abuse them and exploit them. And this is another way that they're going to continue to do that. That's my thought. I'm curious yours.
I think you're right on, and I think that a lot of the bills we see coming out of states like Arkansas, these folks really seem to be legislating from a point of privilege, right? It wouldn't be you or I that's going to get exploited, probably, or your children or my children that would be exploited. It would be those in probably worse situations, worse economic situations, socioeconomic situations, and that seems to be what I find kind of a pattern. Whether it be we're talking about schools, or the workforce, or unemployment, The pattern has really been, kind of my predominantly white middle class family. This isn't a problem for us, so it won't be a problem for anyone else.
You're exactly right. But here's the thing that gets me is, I remember Tom DeLay. I'm sure you remember the former Speaker of the House, Tom DeLay, Republican from Texas, who famously said, if we could get rid of Roe, and we had those 40 million babies, we wouldn't need people from Mexico to come do our cheap labor. And this seems to me that in a time when they've gotten Roe overturned, there's going to be a lot of children coming around, especially poor children. This seems like their cheap labor bill. As we're bringing jobs back from overseas, especially talking about bringing them back from China, this seems like we're going to be importing a lot of poverty labor jobs. And who better to do it with such small hands to do intricate work than the children of poor people? And this is, this is me looking down the road, and angrily so, and saying this is wrong and we should be stopping this instead of letting this stuff go by.
Right. Again, I of course completely agree with you.
I like that.
One of the things, one of our concerns we've been discussing is that along with this bill, the conglomeration of them all, if you look at the big picture and down the road, we've got, a lot of different bills that really are gearing up high schools to train little worker bees, and be ready to go into that workforce and go work just directly after high school. Not against it, but they're going more and more to, I'm going to train you and then send you to go work and give me the next group that are going to be working. And I had a conversation the other day. Why aren't we also, we're telling these kids, here's how to do an interview, here's how to write a resume, but we don't ever cover, here are your rights in a workplace. Let me make sure that, if we're going to educate you and encourage you to, go into the workplace, why don't we make sure and do you a solid that you're not taken advantage of because you're right.
No, you're spot on, right. But again, you brought up education, and I look at what's going on, another coordinated effort, because I look at this attack on child labor as a coordinated effort across the country. Because you look at Ohio, Tennessee, Iowa, Arkansas, all of these places that are Wisconsin that are proposing legislation to weaken child labor laws, which again I thought we had decided decades ago. Also, the assault on public education. Your state, again, another state in a long line of states attacking public education for this idea that we're gonna have these, I guess, tax credits or vouchers or charter schools or all of these privatization schemes that are meant to take money from the public schools that desperately need it and dish it out to wealthy people who already send their kids to private school, creating more poor working class folks. It just seems like a perfect storm of horrible. And your state right there in front of it, Sarah Huckabee came out with, we're going to pay teachers more, but we're going to screw things up. Tell me about the education bill that they've proposed and where we are in the process with that.
I believe it was signed today.
Oh, I must have missed that one.
I think it was signed this afternoon, so it will probably really hit the news tomorrow. But I saw Education Committee take a little break today for a bill signing. I'm assuming that's what it was for. Right. So one thing that the governor did, Sarah Sanders, is one of her first cabinet appointees was Jacob Olivia out of Florida. So if you look at what we're kind of aligned with, I see a lot of policy coming out of Florida into this administration because she brought their education person.
Yeah.
So you're seeing the privatization. They being not a whole lot of what I would say teacher and public input, but the governor and her entering administration have been working on this, they said, for 6 months. And they presented an omnibus bill. Like I know, an omnibus bill, there are some good things in there, right? That upping the pay is a good thing. But in order to get that up in pay, you're going to have to vote along with all of these policy changes. And there were days and days and days of testimony in committee on this bill, and I commend every teacher and superintendent that got involved and came to the Capitol to be heard. Unfortunately, it fell on some ears that it was already a done deal.
So I look at this, Jessica, and the sad reality is the moment we're in is, and I keep saying this, there's a move to repeal the 20th century. Education being a huge part of this, labor rights for children, unemployment insurance, still on the national level, a tax on Social Security and Medicare, and, all down the line. And I fear where this leads us. And this is where a strong labor movement is so very important. And today, Senator Sanders convened a committee hearing in the Help Committee, brought some labor leaders in to talk about organizing. And, your state is a no-rights state, a so-called right-to-work state where workers have a much more difficult time to organize and employers have so much power. Can you talk a little bit about some of the abuses? Because I've had some people go, well, no, the employers have their rights to view they don't abuse people. I say that these abuses have run rampant. They've gotten too far out of hand. And at some point, we've got to rein the kind of exploitation that we see in the workplace in. And it starts at the legislative level. So I'm curious, the conditions in Arkansas.
Regarding, you mean regarding unemployment or
the right to organize? I mean, the idea that people join and form unions in a right to work state, which Arkansas is a right to work state, right?
Correct. We, along with Florida, unfortunately, were the first to enact it. Unfortunately, Rick, it's going to come down to really educating and informing our workforce and our students and our our citizens of Arkansas. The South, unlike so many of my partners and in Pennsylvania, so to say, like where you are, or New York, down here, your neighbor is not necessarily a union member. A lot of people don't know that unions exist in Arkansas because for so long, unions have really spread, and our strength and our power has spread by word of mouth. And, my uncle or my dad's brother, I come from a family of union members. Like, you just don't see that very often down here. So, so many people don't really understand the basics of your rights in a workplace. It's not something businesses tout down here.
Right. Now, the reason I bring it up, Jessica, is that, whether it's, child labor laws, whether it's unemployment insurance, whether it's education, the labor movement has been front and center in fighting for all of those things. The progress of the 20th century has the labor movement's, blood, sweat, and tears all over it. And to see it being destroyed systematically in state by state is angering, frustrating, and heartbreaking, all wrapped up into the same ball. My question is, how do we revive this? How do we get back to my grandparents' generation where, where working people understood the power and the need for organized labor and collective bargaining rights and community more than anything?
Right. I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of a silver lining type of person. I try to look for the good in everything. And
that's what I'm looking for.
Let me tell you. So I think that we are really in an important moment. I think COVID, and especially in places in the South or places that didn't know worker power like some other, people really began to see My health insurance is tied to my job. If I don't have job, I don't have health insurance. Oh, you can just let me go. There were so many things that were brought to light during the pandemic that I think as we come back and it's a perfect disastrous storm. One of the reasons we see these child labor bills is we've got, record retirement out of the pandemic. We knew that we were having an aging workforce, and then the pandemic kind of gave it a swift kick forward, right? So we're having even more of a labor shortage in some industries. And here's our time to I feel shine. That pendulum is less on the business side of things and swinging toward the workers. I think it's up to us as workers and as labor leaders, and for people like you who get the good word out, to really take this moment and use it and move the labor movement forward in real way.
It's all about feeling the power of making lives better. And, I'm a living testament to the power of the union card that I carry in my wallet, having grown up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. And I have led a life that I could have never imagined as a kid. And it's all because I believe, a huge part of it, that union card that I want for other people. I'm not one of those people, I've gotten to a certain point and I'm going to kick the ladder over. I want everyone to have opportunity to make their lives better. And for me, that's the way we do it, and also the way we bring the country back together.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned right to work earlier, and I mentioned silver linings. We've got to, and coming off the pandemic, if we can take this and show that with a union card, you also get a collective bargaining agreement in a state like Arkansas. If you don't have a contract, if you don't have a union and a collective bargaining agreement, you don't have a binding contract in this state.
Or in any state.
Right.
Yeah, every state's an at-will state unless you've got a collective bargaining agreement. And for me, that's one of the, sign me up. But Jessica, I appreciate the time. Great stuff. I hope you'll come back and share some more with us. I'm sure the attacks are going to be coming fast and furious with Sarah Huckabee there as the governor. So we'd love to have you come back and keep us informed on what's going on.
Absolutely, I will anytime. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jessica Aker. She's the president of the AFL-CIO there in Arkansas. ArkansasAFL-CIO.org, the website, if you want to check out the work that they do. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1924. That was the day that tragedy struck at the Utah Fuel Company mine in Castle Gate, Utah. The mine stood about 90 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. Coal mining began at Castle Gate in 1888. On the fateful day of the explosion, at 8 in the morning, 2 violent blasts ripped through the number 2 mine. 20 minutes later, a third explosion went off. According to an investigation by the Bureau of Mines, the explosions inside the mine were extremely violent and reached all parts of the mine. 171 miners were killed instantly. Those who died reflected the diversity of those who worked in the mines. There were 49 Greeks, 22 Italians, 8 Japanese, 7 English, 6 Australian, 2 Scotch, 1 Belgian, and 76 Americans, including 2 African Americans. They left behind a combined total of 241 children and 25 pregnant wives. Rescue efforts were impeded by the poisonous gases and fire raging in the mine. Rescuers donned helmets to attempt to reach those below. One rescue leader, George Wilson, died from the carbon monoxide when his nosepiece separated from his helmet. It's believed the explosion occurred when one of the bosses attempted to relight the flame on his headlamp. At the time, he was investigating a pocket of built-up gas in the mine. The flame ignited the gas and built up coal dust. The previous shift had kicked up the dust, and it had not been adequately watered down. This contributed to the explosions. It took 9 days to recover all of the bodies of those who died. The families of those killed were provided about $64 a month by the company and the state of Utah for several years after the tragedy. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
This ought to make the right-wing crazy. President Biden's approval rating has ticked up a bit. He's up to 42%, the highest level since June. Inflation is easing. Uh-oh, that narrative. Things are bad in right-leaning world. And you want to talk about crazy? Kevin McCarthy handed the gavel over to Marjorie Trainwreck Green to make her the speaker pro tempore. Now I had everybody going, "Oh, does this mean she's in line to be president?" I'm like, no, that's not how that works. Please don't get all freaked out. Evidently, she's just there for the day. But it's kind of scary that she would hold the gavel, even to look at it. Also, again, with Republicans controlling Congress, some fun things going to happen. Jamie Raskin, the Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, put forth a resolution, simple resolution, denouncing white supremacy. Because he claims that, look, a lot of the rhetoric that you're hearing coming out of the members in Congress are a lot of the extreme MAGA stuff, a lot of the white supremacist rhetoric that you get, about the southern border and, replacement theory and all of this stuff. And they said, look, just want you to admit, you're not a white supremacist. Simple. It was very simple. It said, we, members of the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, together denounce white nationalism and white supremacy in all its forms, including the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. These hateful and dangerous ideologies have no place in the work of the United States Congress or committee. Who could be against that? Well, evidently everyone on the Republican side, because none of the 26 members of the House Republican Oversight Committee signed on to it. Not one. Now, interestingly enough, since we're talking about the House Oversight Committee, evidently some of the members of the House Oversight Committee will be visiting the January 6 criminals in jail. And what I love about this is, a lot of those people, I'm sure, I guarantee it, while they're now crying and whining and complaining about how hard it is to be in jail, they don't let me. They were people who were saying, jail's too easy on those people. They get to watch color cable TV, swimming pools, and lift weights all day. They're now seeing that jail isn't all it was cracked up to be, or so they thought. Now, here's some scary stuff. You got Congress not signing on to a resolution saying that they're against white supremacy. You've got them, going, hey, we're going to go visit some white supremacists and crazy people. And a group thought this group, the Boogaloo Boys, a white supremacist group, I find interesting, spelled BOIS, which I always thought was part of the LGBTQ community name thing. Interesting. But thought dead, thought it was over, thought they were done, thought they were sued out of existence. Evidently, there's a resurgence, and they're planning a comeback right around the time that I guess Trump and the Republicans start pushing for 2024. So that ought to be fun. And finally, this hour, the word woke, because Republicans are throwing that around as anything bad. And look, I'm not the mayor of Wokistan, not against it. But evidently, a USA Today poll says that the word woke, the American people aren't as opposed to as the Republicans think. In fact, 56% of people actually favor what woke means, see it as positive. Uh-oh. Quick break. Right back.
The ship has reached the shore. World governments reach historic deal to protect the high seas. France to cover parking lots with solar panels. Plus, another Norfolk Southern train derails in Ohio.
Has anyone told the Republicans to be upset about it yet? All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Thanks to climate change, Los Angeles got a big old snowstorm. California kids made snow bros. Look how cute that is. But then again, Californians deserve to have some fun because I believe California's only other weather option is fire.
Correct. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the Green News Report just finished celebrating our 14th anniversary. We're now in our 15th year.
Yep.
And now, today, we are celebrating our 1300th episode of the Green News Report.
Kind of mind-boggling.
Congratulations. They were all excellent, except for that one.
Well, thanks anyway.
What do you have for us today?
Well, first, huge news. Nearly 200 countries have agreed to a legally binding treaty to help reverse marine biodiversity loss in international waters, which cover half the planet's surface, known as the high seas. After 20 years of negotiations, the treaty marks a major turning point for conserving the ecosystem services of the oceans amid intensifying exploitation from industrial fishing and mining, pollution from chemicals and plastics, and acidification from climate change. The treaty establishes a framework for conserving 30% of the world's land and ocean by 2030. That's part of a deal signed by world governments back in December. This new global treaty addresses issues with the current inadequate patchwork of regulations, which Simon Wormsley of the World Wildlife Fund, in an interview with the UK's Channel 4, says is critical to protect marine animals on migration routes.
For instance, whales in the whole of their migratory routes, because they're threatened from when they start traveling to when they finish traveling. So great whales and similar organisms like turtles, seabirds will be protected along their whole migration route.
Which is important because there were some regional pacts that might have protected those whales or those turtles in various places, but not for their entire route. Now, that has changed.
Exactly. The treaty establishes mechanisms and ground rules to manage marine biodiversity in vast ocean regions that are beyond national jurisdictions, like requiring environmental impact assessments for destructive activities like deep seabed mining and geoengineering experiments to combat climate change. In a major breakthrough, industrialized countries committed to increasing funding to help developing countries build capacity to be able to conserve and manage their biodiversity. A majority of nations must now ratify the treaty for it to come into effect. In the U.S., it's unlikely to garner the required 2/3 vote in the Senate over Republicans' objections.
And yet this administration, at least the one in the White House right now, I suspect will respect this treaty, even if it's not formally passed. So it took 20 years to get to this point, and then they still had to stay all night, overnight, on Friday before they could get this thing finished up on Saturday.
That's always the way with these major treaties. In other news, another Norfolk Southern train has derailed in Ohio over the weekend, the second such crash in Ohio in just over a month. Officials ordered residents to shelter in place until it was determined that the train carried no hazardous materials.
Oh, well, it's all fine then.
In the ongoing East Palestine, Ohio derailment disaster, the Environmental Protection Agency has now ordered testing for dioxin, a dangerously toxic byproduct from burning chemicals. Railroad unions say that rail workers have fallen ill at the Norfolk Southern derailment site, and concerns are also mounting regarding potential chemical exposure for first responders who rushed to the scene from more than 80 regional fire departments. In Minnesota, after state lawmakers passed a law establishing a target of 100% clean electricity by 2040, it may face a legal challenge from neighbor North Dakota. North Dakota regulators say Minnesota's law requiring clean electricity infringes on North Dakota's rights under the Dormant Commerce Clause in the U.S. Constitution because it will eventually phase out Minnesota buying North Dakota's dirty coal electricity.
Good luck with that, North Dakota.
Finally, France has enacted a new law mandating that all large parking lots be topped with solar canopies, and it streamlines efforts to install solar panels on already disturbed land alongside highways. It's all an effort to cut fossil fuel use and meet France's ambitious climate targets. The solar parking lots alone are expected to generate as much electricity as 10 nuclear power plants, but for a fraction of the cost of building just one nuclear plant.
Wow, and that's something you have been calling for at least 15 years that we've been doing this Green News Report. I guess they heard you in France. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So everybody remembers January 6th and Josh Hawley doing the big fist thing and then running. I remember the running more than the fist pump. But I got a lot of my Republican friends who go, Josh Hawley's the future of the Republican Party. He's a man of the people. And look, understand, Republicans are making a true attempt at being the party of the working class. The pivot is happening right before us, and this train derailment is a big part of what they're trying to do. And Hawley's figuring out how to triangulate his way into being that working class populist while still having all of the bad ideas that got us into the mess we're in right now, which is why can't let him do it. Got to hold him accountable. And at some point, I'm hoping someone in that state in Missouri shows him the door. And I'm hoping my next guest could be that guy. That's why I've asked Lance Kuntz to come talk with us. He's a 13-year Marine veteran, also the Democrat running against Josh Hawley. Lucas, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. It's good to be here, man.
I go back to January 6th, and I'm looking at Hawley, and I'm looking at him doing the fist pump, and I'm looking at him doing all these things, and it's not who he is.
No, I mean, the guy's a fraud, right? You're right. They're trying to do this pivot to working class, and he thinks that, getting out there pumping his fist is going to get him some power. So he's out there doing it. And then the second that things get real, he's skittering out the back door as fast as he can, right? The guy's only about power for himself. He'll do whatever it takes. Well, he won't do whatever it takes. He'll say whatever it takes to try to get that power, but it doesn't actually change or do anything, right? The guy is a country club Republican through and through. I mean, he's a guy who, when the Iraq War started, some of us experienced the Iraq War differently than others. I was there as a United States Marine. Josh Hawley is famous for popping popcorn and watching on TV and being so excited that this country was going to war and his peers were getting killed over there. It's absolutely bananas. Like, the guy doesn't understand the working class. He doesn't understand anything about us. And people in Missouri, they realize that, and they don't like him. He's not popular here. His approval rating hovers around 40%. By contrast, John Tester in Montana is at like 60%, right? And so we got a real opportunity here where we can take down one of the frauds in their home state straight away and try to end this thing.
Now, Missouri, in my view, has always been a very strong working class state. I mean, centrist to be honest, but not crazy. I look at someone like Hawley, who does play this kind of faux populist, but sides regularly with the bad ideas. And again, I keep coming back to the moment that we're in. All of the deregulation, the tax code that benefits the very wealthy and corporations, all of the systems that are in place are because of the ideology of people like Josh Hawley.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about Missouri being working class, let me tell you something that we're really proud of here, and that's that we are the only state in the entire union to overturn right-to-work legislation by ballot initiative. People look at Missouri like, oh, that's a red state. I'm sorry, but Virginia is a right-to-work state, right? Missouri is not, because the people of this state on a ballot initiative overturned that legislation, And we did it 68% to 32%. We also increased the minimum wage $5 over the federal level. And, people kind of look down on the Midwest, but I'm telling you right now, $12 here in Missouri is more than $15 is in New York City or San Francisco, right? People here, working class people, we take care of each other. And I know that personally. I grew up, my mom got married at 19. My dad wasn't much older. They had 4 kids before you knew it. My parents were broke. We lived in a working class neighborhood. And when my little sister was born, had to have a heart surgery, we went bankrupt. And the reason we made it wasn't because these country club Republicans on the other side of town were taking care of us. It's not because of the Josh Holleys of the world who were just trying to take more and more for themselves. It's because the people in our neighborhood who had no more money than we did passed the plate for us down at church. They brought more tuna casserole by the house than we could ever eat, right? And took care of each other. That's why I joined the Marine Corps, because one of the guys who took care of us was a United States Marine in Vietnam. And that's where we come from. Josh Holley's a fraud. He went to the fanciest schools. He's the son of a banker. He doesn't know anything about everyday people. You see that in his policies. You see that in the way that he embarrasses himself over and over again. I mean, he actually, he did this bet with another faux populist, J.D. Vance, over the AFC Championship game, which was Chiefs versus Bengals. And he Googled Kansas City barbecue and accidentally bet J.D. Vance Kansas barbecue rather than Missouri barbecue because the dude is so out of touch. And like you want to talk about a guy who doesn't care? Like, he doesn't even care enough to do a proper Google search to make sure that he does the right bet, right? And so that's what we're exposing. It's the fraudulence and the cowardice, and this is important. It's the front lines in this fight where they are trying to claim they're the party of working people. He's against work. He was against overturning right to wage. He's pro right to work. He's a pro right to work guy. He's an anti-minimum wage guy. He doesn't want any of the things we want.
It's funny you bring that up because, Vance had his own problems in Ohio because he didn't know you put the IO after OH. Oops. And again, if you're gonna be of the people, you got to know what the people are talking about. And look, I know Kansas City barbecue. You don't screw around with that. And I live in Pennsylvania, and I know that.
Again, like, the guy doesn't understand. And the worst part is, like, he doesn't understand us, but he also doesn't even have the courage to learn, right? Like, I don't care if you're a rich kid and you want to be a politician. I don't care if you want to represent people, but you got to have the courage to learn how everyday Missourians live. And that's paycheck to paycheck and one disaster from bankruptcy. And you've got to be willing to help us out. I know what both of those things are like. And that's why I understand what we got going on, why I can reach people. And I'm telling you, we're going to expose this guy as a fraud and a coward every day.
Now, you're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Lucas Kuntz. He's a 13-year Marine veteran, also the Democrat running against Josh Holley. His website, lucaskuntz.com, the website. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that and maybe participate, maybe throw in a couple of bucks. Now, one of the things you said a moment ago that caught my attention is this idea of community, people bringing, the casseroles over and being part of a bigger community. And I think we have to figure out how to pull that back together. I've said for a very long time, I think the labor movement is a place where we bring that back together, give people the opportunity to make better wages, hours, and conditions in the jobs that they do. But it's also about talking to each other and finding that common ground of community. I just don't see how someone like Holley is going to be that person. He talks about unity, talks the game, but again, looking at January 6th, the things, the rhetoric, the statements, they don't line up.
No, man, he's a fake populist, right? Like real populism of the plains, populism of Harry Truman, something that we have here for a long time. It's not about dividing people and conquering for your own power, which is what he's doing. It's about bringing people together and going against a system that doesn't work for us. I mean, you were just talking about East Palestine, right? Like, Josh Holley took a junk ton of money from Norfolk Southern, and when he was Attorney General here, and didn't do anything on a lot of the water laws and the EPA stuff. He was part of the crew that tried to overturn those, but you're seeing being a problem there, right? Like, guy is a country club Republican through and through who sees a path to power and is trying to take it. And so for me, like, I don't think you can stand for the community when you sell yourself off to massive corporations and strip our communities for parts. I mean, that's what I see here in Missouri, right? I went to Iraq. I went to Afghanistan twice. I deployed for my country. And the hardest thing for me was coming back home and seeing the community, this place that took care of my family when I was a kid, worse off. Like the first house I ever lived in, it's an empty lot right now, man. It's been torn down. The only new housing in that neighborhood is habitat houses. The one I joined the Marine Corps out of, like, half the windows aren't there. The corner store is gone. And it just kills me to see these folks who claim to be for working people let Wall Street and massive corporations just strip our communities for parts. They let these hedge funds come in and buy housing. They let them just absolutely destroy us. They don't exercise antitrust. I mean, you want to be a real populist, maybe you should use antitrust. I mean, Josh Hawley says he's against the big tech companies. You know what his anti-big tech company bill was recently? That every single American who signs up on a tech platform has to give the tech platforms their driver's license, birth certificate, social security card and stuff. Like, he went after us and our privacy in order to try to put an age limit down instead of actually attacking these companies. And so, for me, again, it's faux populism through and through. And we're on the front lines of that. We got to fight it every single day here.
Wow. Let me ask you this, Lucas, because you talked about the houses you grew up in. And we traveled through Kansas, and we traveled through Iowa, and we traveled through Wisconsin, and we traveled throughout the Midwest, and we saw communities that were broken. We saw communities where the town center is abandoned and homes were abandoned because the factories left. How did it happen in the neighborhoods that you grew up in? What happened to those places? And then, policy-wise, is there anything we can do to revive that? And what direction, what policies do you fight for? What would you bring back to help revive those communities and help those thrive again?
Absolutely. And so what happened was Wall Street teamed up with our politicians to stop enforcing our antitrust laws because it was going to make them more money to do mergers and acquisitions and can consolidate our infrastructure, our economy, and our production, much of which, once the companies were consolidated, was then shipped overseas, right? But when I talk about consolidation, like St. Louis used to be the headquarters of so many companies. They've now been sold overseas, right? Monsanto was sold to Bayer. So now the profits and things from Monsanto are going overseas to a German corporation. Anheuser-Busch, another flagship company here, was sold to InBev, a Brazilian conglomerate with Belgium. Smithfield, our biggest pork producer, is now owned by China, WH Group. It was sold overseas after we let Big Ag consolidate and destroy all the small farmers. So Missouri used to have the most small pork producers of any state in the entire country. We stopped enforcing our antitrust laws, so that's like Sherman antitrust. But for ag, it's also packers and stockyards, stuff like that. We didn't enforce it at all. We let these big corporations take over, and then their shareholders, in order to squeeze a little more value and make profit off of killing off these small farms, and sold themselves overseas. And another big one's JBS, which is a Brazilian conglomerate. And so we just let these big companies consolidate past the point that they should be, so they have more power over politicians. And just, the snowball effect continues, and we lost our industry, we lost our agricultural base, we lost the profit from our land and our production. It's still happening, it's just getting sucked out of the state rather than staying here. And so what we need to do is we need to rewrite antitrust laws. We need to get these corporate hack judges, who, by the way, Josh Hawley votes for every single one of these corporate hack judges. The dude, when he left law school, he went to a corporate white shoe law firm where these people are coming from, right? It's like the most elite corporate law firm in the country. And so he votes for all his pals, who then support these companies, despite what the law says, over workers, over small businesses, and things like that.
See, I think Lucas, I think this is a message that's important for working class people, because time and time again, this was the story, whether I was in Ottumwa, Iowa, or Eau Claire, Wisconsin, or Appleton, or you name the place. This was the story. The story was the local factory, the local identity of that town was sucked away, stripped away, because some hedge fund, Bain Capital, or whoever consolidated or sold off or whatever, took the identity of that town away and the jobs with it and left nothing in its place. And communities suffered and struggled, and there was no government. There was no one to step in and fill that void. So to me, I've been asking the question for a decade now. Who's going to be this generation's Harry Truman? Who's going to be this generation's Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster? Right. So I guess the question is, are you that guy? Are you going to be the next Teddy Roosevelt?
So I was so sick of it at the Pentagon. My last tour of duty, I was doing arms control negotiations with Russia, and I oversaw a couple of treaties, and I saw how these defense contractors had consolidated the industry, were stealing all this money from taxpayers, giving us bad products. And so I decided to leave. And, at the same time, I was seeing my old neighborhoods get destroyed and join a nonprofit, the American Economic Liberties Project, whose sole goal was to do that, right? We went after big tech, we went after big defense contractors, we went after big ag, and several other industries. Big pharma is one of them. Some of the insulin, all the stuff around insulin prices that you're seeing coming out. We sort of initiated that with a few people. We helped run the hearings in Congress against big tech in the House Antitrust, the Judiciary Antitrust Subcommittee, and really tried to expose a lot of this and bring it out into sort of the psyche of the American people. And now what we need to do, now that information's out there and you can see how bad these people is we need to act on it. And that's what I'm doing. I mean, that's what this race is about. It's about empowering everyday people against a system that doesn't work for them and going against the frauds like Josh Hawley, who are keeping that system in place. Because again, let's never forget that this guy is a country club Republican, right? That's it. He is a country club Republican, faux populist, who supports all of the things that take away the slack in our communities, the ability of our communities to take care of each other. Like if you go to my old neighborhood right now, if I were to live there right now, I live in Independence now, not Jeff City. Actually, Harry Truman's hometown. You can see his house down the street from it. But like that community, they don't have the resources anymore to take care of somebody who goes bankrupt from medical bills. Like they're that squeezed. And so when we lose that, and when the community loses the ability to take care of each other, then it just falls apart, which is what you're seeing. And so yes, that is my goal. My goal is to go after these corporations that have bought off our politicians, go after the politicians like Josh Hawley, who give lip service to things while then stabbing you in the back the rest of the time, because I do believe that Missouri is the front line in this fight for working people and for democracy, right? This is the front line where, we have a state where we're willing to overturn right to work legislation 68-32. We're willing to pass this minimum wage. We're willing to claw back power at the ballot box over and over again on these initiatives, because that's what we want. We want the power to lead our own lives again. That's what everyday folks here want. And I plan to be the tip of the spear on that fight and in this thing right here and right now.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show with Lucas Kuntz. He is running for Senate in Missouri against Josh Hawley. The website, lucaskuntz.com. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that, maybe make a contribution to the campaign. I ask every candidate the same thing. What's the hill that you die on? What's that issue that is the most important thing to you that there's no compromise on?
I'm dying on money in politics. The way politics is funded right now is the root of most of our problems. I take no corporate PAC money. I take no federal lobbyist money. I take no big fossil fuel company money. I take no big pharma executive money. We got a really long list. It's probably the tightest in the entire country. But my whole purpose of running is power for everyday people, to show folks that you don't have to be a banker's daddy. You don't have to be an heir. You can actually win an election in this country and raise the money to do it from everyday people. And then by doing that, we can actually change the system. And so, a lot of people say I was crazy when I did that. Well, on the first day of the campaign, we raised more money than any candidate statewide ever has, Republican or Democrat in the state before. We did the same thing the first week because people deserve something that they can believe in. They want something they can believe in. And I am staying pure on that. I'm not going to bend on it. I'm really proud of what we put together, because I do think that we need to win a race, like a real race, a big race, that's not tainted by the wrong money at all, and just show people that's how you can do it. Everyday folks can win again. Because again, I come from a working class neighborhood. My family's got no personal wealth. When my mom got cancer a few years ago, she's living with me, right? She had to move in with me, because when you work a job that's essentially an hourly job, and you get cancer and you can't work that job anymore, you're screwed, man. You got to go move in with family. People like Josh Hawley, they don't know that. They don't understand that. So they don't care about giving us benefits to survive a situation like that. It's no fault of our own. Did my mom go sign up to have lymphoma? No, that's crazy. And so, I'm just bringing that perspective to this thing because I do believe that people with my background should be able to represent each other in the U.S. Senate at the highest levels in our government. And I think if we are able to do that, we're not going to be giving tax credits to the richest people. We're not going to be letting the Saudis buy off our country or China or anybody else, right? We're going to take care of each other. Everyday people aren't idiots. We know what we want. We know what's right.
I was going to cut this short here at this point, but I got to now know about the healthcare situation with your mother. What is she okay? Did she make it through?
She did. Yep. She lived with me for a while. She cleared through lymphoma, and she's been in remission for about 10 years, which is really nice. I'm really happy for her.
No, good on her. But the point that I want to get to is, we, on Twitter and on social media and emails I get from people, healthcare is one of these things that it's all fine, well, and good that you've got private healthcare until you need it. And you hit on the number one problem that I see, that the second you get sick and you need it, eventually it goes away, especially if you have a serious illness. This is something that I want somebody with your perspective in the halls of power saying, this is my reality, and I didn't have money to reach into my pocket and fund all of these opportunities for my family. I want somebody who's going to know how difficult it is to deal with insurance companies, and bill debt collectors, and all of the horrible that happens to working people every day.
Absolutely. That's why I'm running. I mean, I've seen it twice. I saw it when I was a kid, and my family went bankrupt from medical bills, and we had a very, very hard life at that point, right? We really did. And again, the only reason we made it is because people took care of us. I mean, even when I was in high school, we still didn't have any money trying to recover from that. I remember, this is another good example of the way that everyday people take care of each other, right? Like my high school cross country coach, I ran cross country. He saw that I kept getting injured because my parents could only afford to buy me one pair of shoes a year. And when you run that many miles, you're going to get hurt if you don't get another pair of shoes. And I'm going to tell you right now, Missouri pays its teachers 50th in the country, 50th in teachers pay. And that coach, he would secretly buy me a pair of shoes once a year, in addition to the one my parents could buy, so that I wouldn't get hurt. Like, that guy didn't have any money, but he still took care of his community and took care of a kid who he saw promise in. Like, would I have gotten into college then without that? I don't know. And, the only way I got to go to the college I went to is because I got a Pell Grant from the federal government. We need programs like that to take care of people. So it's on education, it's on healthcare. I saw it as a kid. I saw it when my mom had cancer. And the problem is, again, we got these faux populist Josh Hollies who say they care about working people. They know nothing about our lives. They know nothing about what it's like to go through these things. And again, they don't even have the courage to learn about it. They don't care to learn about it. They just spout off their talking points and pretend like they care. And again, that's why it's the front line in the fight for our country, for democracy, for working people. And I'm proud to be leading it.
No, this is another one of those examples where you've got people who have benefited from things, who then want to turn around and tear it apart. I look at, Paul Ryan and I share a commonality. We both had a parent who died, and we were able to collect the survivor's benefit from Social Security. The difference is I didn't think it was near enough. My grandparents struggled to be able to take care of me during the years I lived with them. Paul Ryan wanted to destroy it. This is the kind of perspective I think is important to have in the halls of power. So how can people help? I mean, again, I love what I'm hearing, and I hope you'll come back and share more down the road. How can folks help you?
I'd love to. If you can go to Lucas Kuntz Mo on Twitter, that's our Twitter handle, Mo's from Missouri. Follow us there. Spread the word with your friends and family. If you know someone in Missouri, give them a call, shoot him an email, say that you just heard this guy who understands how everyday Missourians live, work, and operate, and that he'd be a great representative. Have them follow us. If you can donate, you can go to lucaskuntz.com. My last name is spelled Kunce. And, send us a couple nickels. When I talk about the way that we raise money and who we're not raising it from, our average donation is like $30 or something like that. It's one of the lowest in the entire country. We're really proud of that fact because, again, like the only people that I ever want to owe, this is my promise to everyone. It's my promise to myself. The only people I ever want to owe are the folks who took care of me and my family when I was a kid. That's who I'm going to owe when I'm in the U.S. Senate, and people like them. And the only way that we can get there is if we all come together to fund it and make it happen.
No, I'm hopeful for you. I hope folks will go to lucaskuntz.com. We'll get links out on social media. Follow you on the social media channels. We'll get that out as well, and hope folks will follow along. I'm looking forward to this campaign because I think you're going to do great things. Lucas, thanks, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Keep up the great work, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
I'd love to. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. No, again, this is one of those moments, and what I've been talking about for ages. Working class people throwing their hat in the ring and saying, you know what, we're going to stand up to the power of money. We're going to stand up to the wealthy elite, and we're going to fight. This is good stuff. LucasCoons.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Go listen to the Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1924. That was the day that tragedy struck at the Utah Fuel Company mine in Castlegate, Utah. The mine stood about 90 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. Coal mining began at Castlegate in 1888. On the fateful day of the explosion, at 8 in the morning, 2 violent blasts ripped through the number 2 mine. 20 minutes later, a third explosion went off. According to an investigation by the Bureau of Mines, the explosions inside the mine were extremely violent and reached all parts of the mine. 171 miners were killed instantly. Those who died reflected the diversity of those who worked in the mines. There were 49 Greeks, 22 Italians, 8 Japanese, 7 English, 6 Australian, 2 Scotch, 1 Belgian, and 76 Americans, including 2 African Americans. They left behind a combined total of 241 children and 25 pregnant wives. Rescue efforts were impeded by the poisonous gases and fire raging in the mine. Rescuers donned helmets to attempt to reach those below. One rescue leader, George Wilson, died from the carbon monoxide when his nosepiece separated from his helmet. It's believed the explosion occurred when one of the bosses attempted to relight the flame on his headlamp. At the time, he was investigating a pocket of built-up gas in the mine. The flame ignited the gas and built up coal dust. The previous shift had kicked up the dust, and it had not been adequately watered down. This contributed to the explosions. It took 9 days to recover all of the bodies of those who died. The families of those killed were provided about $64 a month by the company and the state of Utah for several years after the tragedy. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Many of today's right-wing governors and state legislators have a problem by constantly pushing an extremist ideological agenda of nonsense about nutty conspiracy theories while imposing autocratic laws to ban everything from voting to library books. They've become widely ridiculed as some combo of kooky, clownish, and embarrassingly incompetent. That's why it's significant that Missouri's GOP lawmakers have not only recognized their image problem, but have actually made an effort to demonstrate that they are serious-minded public officials concerned about their professionalism. Namely, the State House of Representatives has adopted a dress code. Seriously. Specifically, the attire mandate addresses the pressing state issue of female lawmakers who come to work dressed normally but without jackets. Disapproving legislative leaders clucked that this fashion faux pas was undermining the public's respect for them. But now, says GOP Representative Ann Kelly, sponsor of the new code, quote, "It has been fixed." Henceforth, all women legislators in the Show Me state must wear blazers or cardigans in order to, as Kelly explained, always maintain a formal and professional atmosphere in the House. Professional? Excuse me, but these far-right state legislatures totter between being goofy policy forums and carnival sideshows. The only proper attire for many of these so-called legislative leaders would be straitjackets. One lawmaker even claimed that the code was about protecting freedom. The clothing mandate, she explained, eliminates the possibility that the state will be the clothing police. This is Jim Hightower saying, "I'm thinking of moving to Missouri. It must be wonderful to live in a state where the government has already fixed all the big problems people really care about, letting the legislative body focus on properly clothing its women members."
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as you know, we've been following this case down in Florida for a while. You had a county state attorney who evidently Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, was not happy with, believed that he said something, and maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know, but decided that he DeSantis, the governor, thought he had the power to suspend this person and put his lackey into that position. Because prosecutors don't have discretion, evidently, in Florida. They got to do exactly what the governor tells them to do. And this kind of dictatorial mindset is very scary to me. And I'm glad to see that the guy that is at the center of this is fighting back. And the story today is that his federal suit is now being expedited. Maybe at some point very soon, this guy will get back on the job where the voters of that area said, we want you as our state attorney. But that's why I've asked Andrew Warren to come talk with us. He is the suspended state attorney at the center of all of this. Andrew, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks so much for having me back.
So really quick, give me the background. How did this, for folks who don't know, how did this transpire? What's the underlying of this suspension?
Sure. Well, this happened back in August of last year. Out of nowhere, a representative from the governor's office and a couple local deputy sheriffs showed up and basically handed me a piece of paper, said, you've been suspended and you need to leave the building right away. And we called it a political stunt from the beginning, that there was no legal basis for the suspension. We ended up filing a suit in federal court in September. The case went to trial in November and into the beginning of December. It was a 3-day trial. And then in January, the judge made a ruling. And the judge's ruling was pretty interesting. It said that the governor's allegations against me were wrong, that there was no basis whatsoever, that the governor's suspension of me was politically motivated and violated both federal and state law. But then the judge said that as a federal judge, this was essentially a state court issue and he didn't have the power to reinstate me. So that's where we ended up at the end of January. We ended up filing an appeal just on that narrow issue of whether a federal court does have jurisdiction to reinstate an elected official who is suspended in violation of federal and state law. And we've also filed a challenge in state court as well.
And as I remember, the judge ruled that the DeSantis administration and Ron DeSantis violated the Florida Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and still that sticks to this day. So regardless of what they did and how wrong they were, they're still getting away with it every day that you're not seated in that office. Now, look, I understand the wheels of justice grind slowly and all of that, but it seems like time after time these people break the law and do these things, and there's never any repercussion. What's the repercussion for a governor like DeSantis from attacking a state's attorney like you? Is there anything on the books that says there's something that they're accountable on?
Well, there is. I mean, we have laws in this country, and elected officials are expected to follow the law just like everybody else. I mean, it's basic value of our country, right? No one's above the law, not even Ron DeSantis, not even the president. And so it's extremely frustrating on one hand that I haven't been reinstated yet. But on the other hand, we fought back to stand up for free speech and for democracy, the idea that our elections matter, and for the rule of law.
Right.
And the governor and I can disagree all day long about, what criminal justice policy makes sense. We can disagree about, other public policy, how we can disagree about college football and, who should be the first pick in the upcoming draft. But you can't suspend someone because you don't like, what they stand for. You don't like who they are. And the court found that there was no legal basis to suspend me under the very narrow power granted to the governor under Florida law, and that by suspending me because it was politically motivated, it becomes a First Amendment violation as well. So that's what we're fighting back. This isn't just about me getting my job back. This is about making sure is your question addressed, that elected officials are held accountable, that the governors are held accountable, that the rule of law still means something in the state of Florida, even though Ron DeSantis is the governor.
Yeah. Now, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, I guess they've agreed to expedite this. I'm assuming they're going to find, as the lower court found, does this put you back to work, or does this have to go back? Does this have to go further on to another appeals process and eventually to the Supreme Court? What's the path to getting you back where you're supposed to be? What's the path?
Well, our hope is that the 11th Circuit will end up making a decision to reinstate me. I mean, you can never predict these things. That's why we go to court and we argue about it and we litigate it and we trust judiciary to make the right decision.
Do they have the power to put you back in your position? I mean, since the other federal judge said, I don't have the power to do that, I'm a federal judge, could this appeals court, could they do the same thing?
They could. I mean, they could do it a couple ways, right? They could agree with what the lower court said. They could disagree and reverse it. We are raising this in two forums now because, one, we believe that the federal court does have jurisdiction. That is, the lower court did have the jurisdiction to reinstate me, especially after the clear, unambiguous, and compelling findings that the court made about what I didn't do and what the governor did do in breaking the law. And we also filed in Florida, the Florida Supreme Court, to say, look, whether or not a federal judge has authority to order the governor to do something, the state court clearly does. So we'll see what happens in those two cases. But as I've said before, I mean, this is about far more than me and my job. This is really about, it's not even political, right? I mean, people are trying to make it political, Republican versus Democrat, et cetera. But if it were a Democratic governor who suspended a Republican state attorney, I would hope that people are just as upset and outraged as they are about this. I mean, that's not the way our democracy works in this country.
No, absolutely. And the reason that I'm asking so many questions is because I see this as the future. If DeSantis is able to get away with this, and so far he has, this is going to be the model that I think you see in other authoritarian-minded leaders. I look at Georgia right now, and there's a proposal that's going around there that's going to evidently give new, I guess they're calling it new oversight of prosecutors by the legislature, because evidently they don't like Fani Willis, and who knows if they go in and they throw her out because of some made-up allegation, if for no other reason than to just stall and run out the clock until her term is over. Thus denying people, what her job is supposed to be. I'm looking at this because there's no consequences at this point. There doesn't look like there's any consequences to this. So I'm looking at this as what we can expect to see time and time again. So you're kind of the test case here, it seems.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I mean, there have been politicians around the country talking about, well, we need the power to, throw out other elected officials from office. And to go back to Georgia for a minute, the legislature passed the law just a couple of nights ago. And look, let's assume just for a moment that this is not the worst case scenario in terms of their intentions. They're not doing this because the district attorney in Atlanta is investigating Donald Trump and they want to remove her purely for political reasons, which would be just a terrible thing and a mockery of our judicial system and of our democracy. So let's assume just for a moment that they really have good intentions. They're trying to create oversight for elected prosecutors.
Okay, I'm going to go along on this fantasy journey with you. So tour guide along.
Let's go on this journey for a minute. Let's just assume, look, we all want elected officials to do their jobs well. We all want them held accountable for what they're supposed to do. But the moment you make other elected officials have the power to fire them and give them that oversight, you're not creating accountability. You're creating political fealty. You're making sure that people are loyal to other elected officials, which is not the way our democracy works. What that's doing, and again, assuming that good intentions are here, trying to create accountability, you're not at all. And what you're doing is taking power away from the one group of people who should have elective power in a democracy, and that's the voters, the people. If someone doesn't like the job that an elected official is doing, the solution is simple. They vote them out at the ballot box.
Yeah, we've got the ultimate term limiter, the ability to go to the polls and throw the bums out. We can do that. But the people in your area said, we want Andrew Warren as our attorney. And they are the ones who are supposed to be the deciders in this. So to have a governor, and this is my frustration. It's my frustration on a lot of these things. You get people who break the laws and don't seem to care about it, and there's no repercussion. What's the worst thing that happens to Ron DeSantis in this, or any governor? We'll just throw out any governor who decides that they're going to overreach and usurp their power and throw you to the curb and fight this long, costly battle for the taxpayers and put their person into that position for 6 months, 8 months, a year. What's the repercussion? What's the penalty? Nothing.
Well, hopefully the penalty is that the American people, whether it's the voters in Florida or some other state, if we're talking about a different governor, look at that and say, we don't want someone who is willing to break the law to advance their own political agenda. You want someone who says, and I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I didn't vote for you and I like the governor, but this is wrong. And that's what gives me confidence in this. You ask what the punishment is. Well, the punishment is maybe you get kicked out of office, right? Because when governors overreach, when they abuse their authority, when they show that they're willing to trample on people's constitutional rights to push whether it's legitimate policy or just to promote their own political ambitions, hopefully the voters see that and say, we don't want that person as a leader in our state or in our country. But we also have courts that need to step in and say, look, when someone breaks the law, we're going to hold them accountable and we're going to tell them you can't do this and impose the appropriate remedy.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Andrew Warren. He is the suspended state attorney in Florida. You can check out his website, andrewwarrenfl.com. We'll get links out on social media. Again, this is a travesty of justice in my view. Now, the last line of questioning I want to get into, because there's this thing called prosecutorial discretion. As a prosecutor, people have the right to choose to take cases, to not take cases. This kind of mindset that you're going to have a unitary executive who's going to then impose this is the kind of things that we're going to hyper prosecute. This isn't our system. I think the strength of our system is that we have a diverse kind of people who, I'm trying to put this in a way, there's a diverse thought of how we go after enforcing laws and how seriously and vigorously on different laws. I think I'm struggling on this. Help me here. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you're absolutely right. Well, prosecutorial discretion manifests in a couple different ways, right? We have policy priorities that you want elected officials, whether they're prosecutors or legislators or the president, you want those elected officials to make their priorities clear and to be transparent and to follow through on them. And that's how voters should, end up deciding who they want in those positions. I've made it a priority that we should be going after violent criminals and serious fraudsters and the repeat offenders. And, I don't believe that we should be using resources to be super tough on low-level offenders and, as opposed to the violent offenders. If you disagree with that policy, okay, don't. But that is one piece of prosecutorial discretion. The other piece of this court, of course, is at a case-by-case level. And this is where, the narrative just gets completely confusing and with a bumper sticker slogans that you see politicians talking about. These decisions are really hard. Yeah. Prosecutors, look at all the facts, all the evidence. They look at criminal history. They look at how much, their ability to prove the case and how they can bring those witnesses and their ethical considerations. And I could go on and on and on. And so to have someone who is not a prosecutor, who's not involved in the system, say, I don't know, I think you should have prosecuted this case, or I think you shouldn't have prosecuted this case, or I think you should have sought a longer punishment or a shorter punishment. It's really hard to do that from afar because those decisions are so fact intensive, which is why, again, assuming people have good intentions in trying to create oversight for prosecutors, what you end up doing is just having people who are going to become political loyalists and don't end up making the decisions the way our system is meant to operate, which is promoting public safety and protecting people's constitutional rights.
I mean, I look at the job of a state's attorney or a prosecutor as, I want someone who's going to enforce the laws evenly, equally, and not with an ideological bent. Yeah, I want to go after rapists and murderers and fraudsters, and maybe not so much after, like in South Carolina, the woman that they arrested for taking the birth control pill that everyone's all up in arms about. Maybe not as vigorously enforce. I don't know. I'm struggling with the direction that some want to take us. It's frightening, and to see this kind of thing happen, it's going to happen more often, which is why I'm hoping that as this goes down the road, that you're made whole, you're returned to your position, and this is pushed back on, so it doesn't happen again. But Andrew, I appreciate you taking time for us, sharing your thoughts. I hope folks will check out the website, andrewwarrenfl.com. We'll get links out on social media. I appreciate the time, Andrew. Thank you.
Absolutely, Rick. You have a great night.
Thanks so much. Seriously, and I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. You may know that March is Women's History Month, but did you know why it takes place each year in the month of March? It all goes back to today in labor history. The year was 1857. That was the day that hundreds of women working in New York City's garment industry went on strike. The women demanded better wages, safer working conditions, a 10-hour workday, and equal rights. In the years that followed the historic strike, March 8th became an important time for women workers to rally in the city. So on March 8th, 1908, a crowd of 15,000 women workers in New York took to the streets. The marching women demanded the right to vote, an end to sweatshops, and a halt to child labor. At the International Socialist Congress in 1910, a German woman named Clara Zetkin proposed March 8th be declared as International Women's Day. Women from 17 countries agreed, and over the years, the day continued to hold a special place for women in the labor movement. Women from Bangladesh to South Africa to Venezuela have held demonstrations for workers and civil rights on this day. By 1980, President Jimmy Carter declared the week surrounding March 8th Women's History Week. His declaration read in part, "Too often, the women were unsung, and sometimes their contributions went unnoticed. But the achievements, leadership, courage, strength, and love of the women who built America was as vital as of the men whose names we know so well." In 1987, the week was expanded, and March became known as Women's History Month. And it all started with garment workers who were not afraid to stand up for their rights, leading the way for countless numbers of other women who have bravely followed in their footsteps. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, ricksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email rick@thericksmithshow.com. So Michael Flynn evidently going to be suing the government for $50 million. Or let me do it like Michael Myers. $50 million. Because he was evidently on the grounds of wrongful prosecution. And look, you're going to see a lot of this whining from the criminal class on the right because of the Tucker Carlson video. This is all, they didn't show us the videos. And my argument was from the beginning, had Kevin McCarthy put people on that committee to fight back, to question witnesses, to put up an actual defense of Donald Trump, because again, the system is supposed to be, both sides, going after the witnesses. Kevin McCarthy made the choice, made the calculated decision not to engage in the January 6th committee because he knew he was wrong. He knew his own statements were going to be brought up against him. He knew people like Scott Perry. I wanted Scott Perry on the committee. I wanted him in the room. I wanted him on the dais so that when I have a question or someone has a question, go, when people have cell phone communications, Scott Perry, you know a little bit about this. What about your cell phone communications? What were you doing on that day? For me, I think that would have been great. They knew better. They decided to pull out of it completely. They wanted nothing to do with it because they didn't want to have to defend Trump. They didn't want to have to defend the criminals. And they knew that we as Americans we've got short attention spans. Eventually, the seriousness of this was going to pass. Eventually, the media power of the right-wing spin machine was going to take over, and we were going to normalize it. It was a patriotic day of picnickers in the park. It was a day of families taking pictures. Look at how orderly they were. They walked between the ropes. Look at them. Look at the video of them shooting Ashley Babbitt. Here's the thing. And I've had a bunch of people email me going, they murdered, she's a martyr. No. She's a criminal. She was told, do not breach this door. Do not come through this door. Can you imagine, had she gotten on the other side of that door and opened that door for the throngs of angry people shouting, hang Mike Pence, to have access to all those people who were just behind those folks in Congress, those representatives who were cowering in fear, waiting for them to be swinging from the rope? Had she gotten through, had she opened those doors, this is a different country right now. I can't imagine that she wasn't told numerous times, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. But again, it's the narrative that she's a martyr. And the reality is, I remember, watching the videos that she posted, on the way to January 6th. This poor woman she drank the Kool-Aid. This woman truly bought the idea that they were going to, this was a revolution. They were going to stop the steal. They were going to overturn this, and they were going to right the wrong because they bought the big lie. They bought it hook, line, sinker. They bought the whole thing. Baby, bathwater, spigot, they bought it all. And they were going because they thought history was going to remember them as patriots because they were going to water the tree of liberty. They were going to be remembered in history. And look, Ashley Babbitt will be remembered in history. Her name will be remembered. I don't know how it's going to be remembered, to be honest with you, because we're in a weird moment. We're in a moment where history isn't settled yet. History is going to remember her as someone who, an unfortunate victim of right-wing insanity, who put herself in a position where she should have never put herself in and died as a cause of it. Or, the right is going to, we're going to have the Civil War and they're going to rewrite the history of the day and make her a martyr and the beginning, the Crispus Attucks of this revolution. And the sad reality is these folks bought a lie. It was a lie. And the people who continued to tell the lie and still to this day tell the lie knew it was a lie. And they did it because it was all about the money. Someone, sent me an email saying that in Tucker Carlson's book, he talks about Bill O'Reilly and how Bill O'Reilly's got this great shtick as the everyday working man and, this loose Catholic, this tough guy. And he said, if anyone found out what he was really like, it would all fall apart. Same thing for Tucker Carlson. We now see behind the curtain. We now see who Tucker Carlson really is and has always been. It's always been about the money. And I've been saying this for years about right-wing media. It's about the sale. It's not about the policy. It's not about making your life better. It's about lining their pockets at your expense. So the question is how much longer are we going to put up with it? I hope the folks who are there are reading it. I hope there's a Lonesome Roads moment. I'm just not hopeful. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Podcast. Wherever you get yours, find ours. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.